Morning. Welcome to Banter and Beans. It's a half-hour summer series hosted by me, Pat McDonald, and Ben Kinsley. Ben, good morning.
Morning.
Ben and I, just for a transparency, that's the buzzword of the day. Ben and I are members of the board of directors of Campaign for Vermont, and we also co-host a public access show entitled Vote for Vermont. So we started this program because we're thinking, ever wonder what's brewing in the State House when the legislature's in session? Exactly, my coffee too. This says Banter and Beans on it. So while you're home having coffee, what are they up to? And this year they passed about 100 bills, and I bet you couldn't name 3 or 4 of them because they don't get covered by the press. And we just thought you should know what's out there. So our sessions will be reviewing these bills, letting you know what was passed. And in today's show, we're actually going to talk about 2 bills that were vetoed by the governor. It was unplanned by both of us. Somehow great minds think alike. We decided to let you know, because they'll be back in January, I'm assuming. There were just a bill or 2 that went to the veto session and was passed. The rest were put on the shelf until January, but you should know they're coming because the one I'm doing, which is S79, is very interesting. And Ben is doing, what bill are you doing, Ben?
I had picked S107.
All right, so do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, so S107 made it through both the House and the Senate, went to the governor's desk, and he returned it without a signature. And we'll talk about why that is here in a few minutes. So basically what S107 does is it creates a public records exemption for 19-year-olds. So there's a current public records exemption for minors, where arrest information, any charges that are brought are exempt from public record until that case goes to trial. So that's basically a way to protect minors who may be innocent from a crime or whatnot. So this basically extends that for 19-year-olds. And also does a couple other things, like specifying that public agencies may disclose identifying information related to the initial arrest if there is a public health or safety concern. So let's say that person had done something that's a public safety risk. That's the only condition under which authorities could release information about the nature of the arrest. That seems like a fairly unlikely occurrence. There's also a shift in who is responsible for those records. Whenever you're talking about criminal records, there's often a variety of different agencies that may hold those. It could be the local agency of jurisdiction. It could be the state police. It could even be a federal agency. This makes it clear that the custodian of the records, when it comes to minors and to persons 19 of age, it's the criminal division of the Superior Court in Vermont that is responsible for maintaining those records, and that I think was done as basically as a way to manage where that information is, make sure that agency is read in on what the rules are around releasing those records. So that I think is what the purpose behind that was. It's also a good idea just to have a clear, chain of ownership for any sort of public records. So that's just good practice. So what's interesting about this, the bill itself would seem pretty harmless, and I'm not convinced that it's harmful necessarily. I think that we can have this open discussion of what the appropriate age is. Is 18 really an adult in a lot of ways, or are additional protections in place or necessary? So I think that's part of it. I mean, one of the best arguments around this has been, you know, brains are not fully developed until mid 20s anyway. So like, why are we expecting, you know, 18, 19, 20-year-olds to make rational decisions that the rest of us adults would, agree with?
Of course, I can hear them arguing, but we allow them to vote now younger, and we allow them to go into the service. That's the other part of the age issue. What is maturity, right?
Right, exactly. So, anyhow, I think for me, I would say that this isn't necessarily a maturity issue. And I'd want to hear the arguments for and against it, I think. But I think for me, this is these sorts of rules are meant to protect minors who are still in someone else's custody. Uh, so I think for me, this doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because if I'm understanding the purpose of this, it makes a whole lot of sense to have a rule like this for minors. When you start extending it to 19 or 20-year-olds, then you have to start thinking about other things, at that point, because legally they're going to be probably going to be tried as adult,
Mhm.
in whatever case that's being brought. There's other things that are linked to this. It's not just public records. And that was sort of the argument that the governor made, when um, he vetoed it. He basically said 3 years ago, I'm reading from his press release, 3 years ago, I signed legislation intended to give young adults who had become involved in the criminal justice system certain protections meant for juveniles. At the time, I was assured that prior to the automatic releases in age prescribed in the bill, plans would be in place to provide access to the rehabilitation services, housing, and other supports needed to hold, both these young adults accountable and to help them stay out of the criminal justice system in the future. Basically, what he's saying is that the legislature never followed through on that. So they never put the wraparound services in place, to help support juveniles that are coming out of the criminal justice system or have brushed up against it. And before we start raising the age limit on what's covered under those, um, flexible protections, then he wants to see those wraparound services,
Yeah.
basically, is what he's asking for.
I don't know if this gets involved in this discussion, but rehabilitation, they must have statistics about what ages respond better to rehabilitation, rather than putting a black mark on somebody that maybe if they're a certain age that they would respond better and perhaps get their act together and have a more productive life ahead of them. I wonder if does that fit into this at all, or am I off base?
Yeah. So, you know, one of the things that he actually put in his press release was, that 18-year-olds, often get, once they are in the criminal justice system, they often get recruited by older criminals who are in the system, right?
Right.
They meet people they may not have met otherwise, and those people try to recruit them into, whatever they're involved in. Um, so the recidivism rate for teenagers is extremely high,
Oh,
basically, is what
really?
he's
That's
getting
really what
at.
I was getting at. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So that's why those, wraparound rehabilitation services are so important, because those are meant to break that cycle.
Right, for sure.
Yeah, because once you have, and the other part too is that oftentimes, if you have, if you did something as a minor, you can often get that expunged from your record. But
Yes,
then
right.
if you reoffend as an adult, once you're over 18, that's a lot harder to get off your record. Um, So, it then becomes a vicious cycle of no one wants to hire you. So you kind of you don't have a choice except for to, you know, get involved in, things that may not be above board because no one will hire you.
Right,
So it
exactly.
just makes it exponentially more difficult, which is why those rehabilitation services are kind of critical.
Now on applications, job applications, they've deleted the "Have you ever been accused of a crime" or something. That's so as not to um, put up some kind of barriers for employment for folks who have been through the criminal justice system.
Yeah, so they can still, yeah, and that part of that is a hiring issue
Right,
because we're so desperate for workers right now.
right.
But part of that is also, um, I don't believe they're allowed to ask if you've been accused of a crime anymore. I think they can ask if you've ever been convicted of a crime.
Oh, really interesting. Well, that's public record too, so they.
Right. So that would be public record. And it also matters more, right? Because anyone can accuse someone of a crime.
Right.
But if you've actually been convicted of that crime, then it's been substantiated. So that's the piece there.
Oh, so they're still asking related questions about that. I thought that they had just
I
completely
I think
wiped
in
it
some
out.
cases they are, depending on what. Like for example, if you were going to apply for a security clearance with the U.S. government, like everything's on the table.
Oh, for sure. Right.
Yeah.
Especially if you're bonded, I'm sure if there's a job that requires bonding, they want to know who they're bonding and what the risk is.
Right. Right. Exactly. So, yeah, it really depends on what the job is. But yes, a lot of employers have dropped those types of questions.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
So do you think it's coming back next January?
I think so. I think this is probably going to turn into so they brought it up in June when they were back in the session. They didn't take a
Ah,
vote on it. They just
ah,
brought it up for floor discussion.
yeah,
Um, I think this probably is coming back, but it's going to be. I think it's probably going to be a negotiation. I think we're probably going to see more. It's going to be a larger, more comprehensive bill. I think because I have a feeling the legislature is probably going to be forced to um, agree with some of the stuff the governor asked for. And to me, it says if they didn't even try to vote on it on the House floor when they brought it up, they probably don't have the votes to do it.
yeah. Right.
So,
I wish they would make up their minds about aging because I'm sitting here thinking, as I mentioned before, about voting. At some towns and have it down to 16, going into the military. And then abortion, which they say if somebody under 18 doesn't have to tell mom and dad the parental notification. So I think they should really make up their minds what what is an adult and make it consistent across the board because you're either an adult or you're not. And so that age should just carry through all the issues, I would think.
right. So the tricky part with that is that um, people that's an individual thing.
Oh, that's
Individual
true. How do
people
you
are going
judge it?
to. Right. So then how do you judge it? So you do have to pick a number at a certain point, but you have to also, when you pick that number, be cognizant of the fact that not everyone that number is not necessarily universal.
Right.
So
And even people my age might flunk the adult test. So there you go.
uh,
Afraid to take it.
I would be curious what that test would look like. I'm not
Well,
sure.
exactly.
What would be on that test?
Yes. And how that's what I'm saying. How do you judge? It's environmental. It's all kinds of things that are involved with maturity and your experiences to date and the support system you have. I mean, it's huge. So you can't make it, but it should be a date that everything falls into. Because I don't see how you can argue one issue and yet say it's okay in another issue. And I think it's
Well, I mean, we do the same thing with drinking age, right?
oh, absolutely, that's true.
Right. So yeah, you're an adult at 18. You can go, you can vote, you can go die for your country, but you can't drink.
Exactly, exactly.
So this is a issue we've been grappling with for a while. It's like how do you treat an adult and what's the appropriate cutoff? And I'd say scientifically, 21 is closer to the correct number than 18. but good luck telling 18-year-olds that.
Well, exactly. And good luck to parents who are like, I'm going to get him through to 18 and that's it. My hands are,
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm
Yep.
done.
So
Of course, it
anyhow,
would also stop people who live in New Jersey from driving all the way into New York if they're for a drink. Just saying. Don't know anybody who ever did that, but just
or
saying.
Montreal or
Yeah, right. Exactly. I
yeah.
was sort of one of those people. But anyway, well, thank you. We'll and you know what? Could you explain to folks, because I have a letter that the governor sent too, and he said on the press release said Governor Scott returned without signature and vetoed. So there's two different steps. If he doesn't sign a bill, it comes into law in a certain amount of days. Does he write to the Senate and say I'm letting this go into law without? Does he do that officially, or does just on vetoed bills?
So he does have to notify the clerk of whichever house the bill came from, what he's doing with it, so that officially they have the records to say the governor did this with it. But you're right. When a bill goes to the governor's desk, the governor has three options. The first option is to sign it into law. Usually, sometimes that comes with a signing ceremony, but not always. That's kind of usually a feel-good thing. It's not a requirement. So it either gets signed into law. He can not sign it and let it go into law. I believe it's 5 business days, 5 or 7 business days.
That's shorter than I thought.
Yeah. So he doesn't have a ton of time to let it sit there.
Yeah.
But if he doesn't sign it and that time expires, then it becomes law automatically, but he doesn't have to endorse it necessarily. Right. So this is one of those things that a governor will often do if there's a bill that comes across his desk that politically he can't touch, but doesn't actively oppose, or he doesn't mind if it goes into law, but he's not enthusiastic about it, so he'd rather not have his signature on it.
Right.
So those are usually the two cases where you'll see a governor will not sign a bill and let it go into law. And then the third option, of course, is veto. So that's where you actively say, no, I'm not going to let this go into law, and they send it back to the legislature. So This is meant to be, and actually this S107 is a great example of this. This is meant to be a check and balance. This is part of our check and balance system, where the legislature comes out with a bill and the governor says, no, this is not part of our agreement from 3 years ago. You're not living up to your end of the bargain. And that is part of what this is meant to do, is this particular tool in the legislative or the government toolbox is for this sort of thing.
Yeah, that happens a lot, I must say, over the years when they're required to do something in June through a bill, and come January and nobody follows up on it.
Yeah.
Which I think the Ledge Council does a good job of, and perhaps Joint Fiscal does a good job of keeping a track of the requirements in each bill. Usually you get a list of this report's due, that report's due, but I don't know how closely they follow it up to see that everything is actually done. But this would have been a good example, right?
Yeah, well, usually where it really falls apart is, and I think this might have been the case here, is that 3 years ago when the legislature made that agreement with the administration, there was an election in between now and then, and a lot of the committee chairs changed because there was a change in leadership. So I think that anytime when you have major turnover like that, you think in 2020 we had Speaker of the House turnover, the Senate pro tem turned over, most of the committee chairs turned over. So that lack of continuity can really cause issues like this to come forward, and the governor called him on it.
There you go. Good for him. So we're going to skip. How much time do we have left, Ben? 'Cause I'll
We
have
got
to talk.
about 10 minutes.
Okay, I'll talk fast. S79 is an act relating to improving rental housing health and safety. And I think we all know that housing is almost a crisis, if not a crisis in Vermont now. People can't find housing, nor rentals, nor or purchasing, and can't afford the rental prices that are out there or the housing prices. So it's pretty pretty volatile. So this was S79 was out of Senator Sirotkin's committee. He was a primary sponsor of this bill. That's the Senate Economic Development. There's more to his title of that committee, but he's in charge of economic development. The governor did veto it, and he sent a letter on July 2nd to Honorable John Bloomer, and he said that this bill, and it does when we go through it, it'll kind of get your head swirling of all the regulations that are in this bill and fees, and so he called them out on that. And there are two programs that he said are already in place: the Vermont Rental Housing Investment Program and the Vermont Homeownership Revolving Loan Fund, which are there to support grants, to support creating new housing and purchasing units. And those two programs should be able to continue on regardless of the veto of this bill. And so I'm hoping that they are, in fact, chugging along. He also said he'd be willing to work with the legislature to on this bill, because there's a lot of good things in it that should be flushed out. And he would support a rental housing registry for those buildings which exceeded 2 dwelling units or more, and talked about the health safety inspection of buildings, which, goodness, given the horror in Florida, that's kind of timely, isn't it? Where the buildings was not deemed to be.
We don't have, I mean, yes, it's important. We don't have any buildings the size of that Florida complex. Yeah.
But if I was on the second floor of any building, though, I wouldn't want it to.
I think the tallest, by regulation, the tallest building that can be built in Vermont is like 5 stories, I think, 5 or 6, something like that. So
still could do some damage.
I mean, it could definitely, yeah, but it's not 13 stories like that condo complex. And
I was in New York when they a building of, I don't know how many floors it was, but the entire facade fell off. Nothing else was hurt in the building, but the entire facade. So you'd walk by and you'd just be like a window into people's apartments. It was the weirdest thing. And the rest of the building was safe, but the entire facade fell off in the street. It was not good. But anyway, they moved a lot of obligations into the DFS Fire Safety Inspection Group, the Division of Fire Safety. And I think the governor was worried that they were going to be overwhelmed, and we needed to talk about how to balance out all the obligations that they wanted to put in this. And then he just said that he did support those two programs we just talked about and would hope that they would continue on. So this bill is 24 pages. It had a strike all, which we should talk about in one of the shows. It went past the Senate. It passed the Senate, and it came over to the House, and the House had so many changes that they decided to do a strike all. So the entire 24 pages of the Senate bill was deleted, and the House put in their version, which did pass back to the Senate, and it passed. But it was really very much filled with, as we will see here in a minute, new fees, new grant programs. The first thing that they talked about was fire safety and carbon monoxide when buildings needed to have the protection of the carbon monoxide warning signals, and where and when those should be put into place and how often they should be checked. There was the inspection area, which what the governor was concerned about, that they put way too much on the fire safety group. It's a wonderful group. They used to be in the Department of Labor and Industry, and when they moved that to to public safety is when the Department of Labor and Industry merged, because they could do it more effectively and efficiently without the fire service group there. They talked about penalties, of course, up to $10,000 if you're not in compliance with some of the things that are in this bill. Big section on municipal enforcement. They assigned responsibility to the municipalities, but it's very much controlled by the state what the municipalities can do and not do. And to tell you the truth, I was designated the health commissioner of Berlin one time. It was I was so nervous. So I don't know that they have the skills in some departments and some municipalities. So while their hearts are all in the right place, that the state would grant them responsibility only if they have the correct support and the correct expertise. This is starting the fund. They developed a building inspections special fund that fees are collected in this section, and they're available to the Department of Public Safety to offset the costs of the Division of Fire Safety. So it's sort of like a Fish and Wildlife, where the Fish and Wildlife Department sort of live off the fees for fishing and hunting. And this is creating the Division of Fire Safety from fees and things that the money that they collect. They talked about, particularly from this housing registry, which I think is one thing the governor was opposed to. This thing just has everybody registering their apartment, regardless of size, regardless of dwelling unit, how many. And it was, can't see the numbers I'm reading, it was $35 for each registered apartment, which if you're a landlord could run up to a few bucks. And there's a lot of rules about who registers, who doesn't. I understand the purpose of this is to see what the housing stock is here in Vermont, to keep a handle on it. But on the other hand, there's so many regulations here, as the governor mentioned. Maybe people would turn away from renting out their cottages, renting out things in their house for housing. So that $35 per unit. So it's not per building, it's per unit. And if you've got a large enough building, that could run into a few bucks. And they also had a big section on mobile homes. A lot of mobile homes were exempt from this, but some were. And there's I see a lot more mobile homes on land than I used to see before. So I think people are looking to mobile homes to be a little bit less expensive way to live.
Yeah.
Because some of these mobile homes are absolutely gorgeous. I camp in Maine, and some of the places we have a section where people come in temporarily, a couple of nights, a couple of weeks, and some of these rigs, good grief, they're amazing. So
yeah, some of those fifth wheels are pretty impressive.
Oh yeah, they're incredible. I mean, seriously, I had an RV one time that had central vac. I don't have central vac in my own home, but I had central vac in the RV. I thought that was hysterical. I got in my RV. That's important. They set up a rental housing safety special fund, which again they were collecting funds with a penalty of $200 per unit if you knowingly fail to register. Or to pay a fee that's required in this section. They also create, I love this, they also create positions in public safety, 5 full-time classified inspector positions to go out and inspect and enforce the laws as outlined in this bill. They could also, if they have the funding from the fees they charge, to hire more if they need them. So there's no cap on the fees, which kind of surprised me, because they're just hiring without a cap isn't. You can always go back and ask for more, but I wouldn't want to leave that door open. The Department of Housing and Community Development also has the authority to have 1 full-time and 1 part-time classified position, and they had $300,000 appropriated from the general fund to start up funding to hire and to have one or more positions authorized. So there's 300,000 there that was authorized to housing and community development. Um, there was a section here on local health officials, which is what I was talking about. I for sure needed training to take that job. And they give the authority to municipalities for inspecting rental housing. I would hope they would have given me the authority because I didn't really have a lot of experience in that regard. And I was smart enough to call in people who did, so I had backup for whatever decisions I made. I didn't do it myself. Um, and if the local folks do inspect without having that authority, that could get them into a little bit of trouble. There was a lot of strike all in the, I love it. There's a lot of strike all in the strike all amendment. That was several pages of work. They also created a transition provision about creating rules to get this whole thing, the relationship between housing and community development and public safety, to get that ironed out, how that will work between the two departments and how it all works smoothly. They also created a housing investment program, which we talked about is also created. They just expanded it. And the governor, we talked about that we have one of the oldest stock in the country, our housing,
Yeah.
for housing. And that, of course, just by its nature, requires more care and maintenance. That's why weatherization is so important here, because our homes are old and sort of like a gale force wind in some of them as they come through the.
I don't know. Some of those older houses were built better, I feel like.
That's true.
Not all of them, but some of them.
Yeah, that's like I used to go to Switzerland a lot on company business, and the houses there were very expensive, but they were just built to last, and you could tell the quality of the work, and there was no shoddy anything when they were building stuff in Switzerland. Their rules were very, very specific, and they had a lot of people looking at when you were building something.
Yeah,
And you're right, there were.
when I was in Switzerland, there was this inn that we stayed at that was literally it was on the side of a mountain. And it was just this little place, like a mom and pop place. But like it was on the side of this ravine where it was like literally like a 45-degree angle. And I'm like, how did you build here? You know?
It did, and it's probably standing today.
Oh, yeah, that thing is going to be there for forever because it built like a bomb shelter. But, you know.
Yeah, and it's worth the money. Everything's expensive over there, but it's worth the money. Anyway, they expanded the rental housing investment program, which I just mentioned, and they expanded it to reflect the rehousing recovery program, which takes these old buildings and upgrades them so that they are ready for rental again. Apparently, that's a very successful program, and they talked about expanding both those programs. So that's good that they've actually took what we have and are doing well to expand them, learn from what we've done right. There's a grant or loans through those programs not to exceed 30,000 per unit. And what else? And then of course we have an entire section of reporting. I think the program, the revolving homeownership revolving loan fund, is really excellent to allow people, give them some support if they're new homeowners, first-time buyers. They also have a section here to support the BIPOC community if it's there. Somebody from the BIPOC community is looking to buy a new home. And I think first-time homeowners, that's a big decision. So it's good we're helping them out a little bit. And I have the grants themselves seem to be zero interest, and in some cases the payments are suspended for a while, so that they really do take that burden off of first-time homeowners to make sure they're solid and can respond to the responsibilities of home ownership. So that's it. The governor vetoed it. You'll see it coming And they also, interesting, they also did something here for renters. It's called Action for Ejectment, that's a new word, on an emergency basis, where there are reasons if there's criminal activity. As you know, for landlords to get rid of existing tenants, it's like pulling teeth, and
Yes.
can last a long time while they're busy doing damage to your facility. So this has four areas where you can get tenants out quickly, which I think the landlords would be very pleased about. And there's a hearing process which is sped up so that both the landlord and the tenant can have their issues heard by the courts, and if there's criminal activity and other things, damage that's being done to the landlord's property, they can get them out quickly. So that's that bill. But when you read the details, there's a lot of regulation, a lot of, as the governor said.
Pat, do we know why the governor vetoed it?
Yep, he said it was too much regulation. He really thought that that would stop people that perhaps had an apartment in their house, a camp that they could rent out, that they would be turned off by the regulations, the reporting, the fees, and said that he would rather, and just the registry itself, that's something that needs to be talked about, because people are sort of afraid that camel's nose under the tent when you start registering housing and that sort of thing. What's next, sort of.
Right.
And I think that he felt that the bill could have been, it certainly focused on the existing programs and expanded those, which was a good thing. But there were a lot of new positions, a lot of new responsibilities, and he just thought it was a too much when we're all paying. Most of us think we're paying too much for everything else, so that it would just be one more thing to add to the pile of increased costs here in Vermont.
Yeah, because landlords are going to pass the cost of jumping through those hoops on to renters.
Sure.
Yeah.
I am glad that they did put that section in, though, because I know some folks who are landlords, and what they have to go through to get somebody who's obviously trashing their, holes in the walls, breaking equipment in the kitchen, and this all costs. It's got insurance, but it all costs time and money for the landlord, and you can't get these people out. Once you're in an apartment, there's a lot of work that has to get done to get those folks who aren't treating your property with any respect to get them out.
Yeah, that's a difficult thing.
Yeah, so as usual, there's Bill's got good things and bad things, and I guess the governor felt that the bad outweighed the good. But he did offer, of course, to work with the legislature. I said before, you and I talked before the show, that I think they have to do a little more talking throughout the legislation, because as was a big surprise in House Economic Development when they took out the mini TIF language right at the end of the session. This is a bill that was completely rewritten by the House, right, and then vetoed by the governor. So somebody wasn't talking to somebody. And right now, economic development, in my mind, is the primo issue of this state, especially if we're looking at more cases of COVID and variants thereof. So no time to be goofing around. We need to get serious about economic development.
Totally. All right. Well, we are out of time. So thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll keep drinking your coffee. We'll see you next week.
Love the Java. See you. Bye.